Ever wonder how real world-changing movements actually get started? I mean, not the myths we hear, but the real mechanics behind them. Well, in this explainer, we're going to deconstruct one of the most pivotal moments in history, the Montgomery Bus Boycott, to uncover this hidden formula for social change. And then we'll see how those exact same rules were used, decades later, to build something totally different, a modern megachurch.
Okay, so our story kicks off here. It's a Thursday. Imagine this, a woman named Rosa Parks, after a long, tiring day sewing at a department store, just wants to go home. She gets on the bus, pays her fare, and sits down in the first row of the section where black passengers were allowed. Just a completely normal end to a completely normal day. Or so it seemed. But then, the bus starts to fill up. The driver demands she give her seat to a white passenger who's standing. 3 other black passengers get up, but Parks, she doesn't move. And when the driver threatens to have her arrested, she responds with these 5 quiet but absolutely earth-shattering words, "You may do that."
And so, she was arrested. Now, we all know this part of the story, right? Her act of defiance became this huge spark for the Montgomery Bus Boycott, a massive moment in the civil rights movement. But here is where the real mystery actually begins. Because her act, it wasn't the first of its kind. Not even close.
Yeah, when you look back, you see this surprising pattern. Years before Rosa Parks, other people had done the exact same thing. Geneva Johnson back in '46, Viola White in '49, and get this, in 1955 alone, just months before Parks, a teenager named Claudette Colvin and then Mary Louise Smith were also arrested for refusing to give up their seats. But none of their arrests sparked a movement.
And that brings us to the big question, right? Why? Why did Rosa Parks' arrest ignite a whole citywide protest when all those others just fizzled out? Well, the answer isn't just about the political climate. It's about something deeper, the power of our social habits.
You see, sociologists have found that successful movements usually follow a kind of 3-part recipe. First, they start because of the strong ties of friendship. Second, they grow through the weak ties of a wider community. And third, they last because they give people new habits and a whole new sense of identity. Let's break that down. So part 1, the spark. And it all comes down to friendship. A movement doesn't just begin with a bunch of strangers. No, it starts with people who already know each other, who trust each other. And this is what made Rosa Parks so different. She wasn't just some random seamstress. She was a community hub. She was deeply plugged into dozens of social networks. I mean, look at this. Secretary of the NAACP, active in multiple churches, a volunteer, part of a knitting circle. She had what sociologists call strong ties that connected all these different parts of the city across economic and social lines. Everybody knew her, and everybody respected her. So, because of this, when she was arrested, word spread like wildfire through all these separate networks. Her friends, from the head of the NAACP to the teachers in the Women's Political Council, they all heard what happened within hours and immediately started organizing. You know, the social habit of friendship just kicked in. When a friend you deeply respect is treated unjustly, you act. Simple as that.
But you know, a movement can't just survive on friendship alone. To grow from a small protest into a citywide phenomenon, it needs another kind of social connection, the pressure that comes from the wider community.
And this is where weak ties come into play. These are your friends of friends, your colleagues, the people you kind of know from your neighborhood or church. They're not your best buddies, but they are absolutely essential for spreading ideas. Think of them as the bridges that connect different groups of friends. There is this fascinating study on the 1964 Freedom Summer Project that really proves this. A sociologist wanted to know why some student volunteers went to Mississippi, even though it was incredibly dangerous, while others dropped out. And what he found was wild. It had almost nothing to do with their personal beliefs. The students who went were the ones whose whole community, their friends and their wider weak tie networks, created this powerful social expectation that they would go. Basically, it was peer pressure. And that is exactly what happened in Montgomery. As soon as ministers announced the boycott from the pulpits of every black church in the city, taking part became a community-wide expectation. Your neighbors were doing it, your church was behind it. Suddenly, riding the bus that Monday would have meant losing face, losing social standing. The weak ties of the community made the boycott absolutely massive.
So, okay, you've got the spark of friendship and the fuel of community pressure. But what makes a movement last for more than just a day or a week? How does it survive through hardship and keep going on its own? Well, that requires a third and totally crucial element.
This is where Martin Luther King Jr.'s leadership was just transformative. In the face of all these threats and violence, I mean, his own home was bombed.
He preached this radical new idea to the protesters.
King gave the movement new habits. The whole philosophy of nonviolent resistance wasn't just a tactic. It was a completely new way of acting, a new way of seeing yourself. It transformed people from victims into proactive, self-directing leaders of this huge moral crusade. And this new identity, which was rooted in forgiving and even loving your enemies, that gave them the strength to carry on by themselves, without needing constant direction.
Now, here comes the twist. This three-part formula, it isn't just for the civil rights movement. Decades later, a young pastor named Rick Warren used the very same principles, just in a different order, to build Saddleback Church out in California.
So this is where the playbook just becomes crystal clear. Let's look at Montgomery's path again. It started from the strong ties of Rosa Parks' huge network of friends. It grew through the weak ties of community peer pressure, and it lasted by creating new habits, the whole philosophy of nonviolent protest. Now, Saddleback did something brilliant. It reversed the order. It started with weak ties, getting thousands of people to come to these big, anonymous weekend services. Then, from that huge group, it created strong ties by getting people into small, intimate Bible study groups in their homes. And finally, it created new habits and a new identity with things like daily prayer. The order was different, but the three ingredients, strong ties, weak ties, new habits, they were exactly the same.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Well, it turns out there's a predictable structure, a timeless recipe for how movements happen, whether you're fighting for civil rights or building a church.
Let's just recap it one more time so it really sinks in. It starts with the intimacy of strong ties. It grows through the social pressure of weak ties, and it lasts by creating new habits that give people a new identity.
The main thing to remember is this: world-changing movements are not random acts of history. They're built on the bedrock of our most basic social habits, those patterns that connect us, pressure us, and in the end actually change who we are.
And the result of getting this formula right, the Montgomery Bus Boycott lasted for an incredible 381 days. You had men riding mules to work, people walking for miles, an entire community holding together, all sustained by the power of these social habits.
And its impact went way beyond just one city's bus laws. The boycott basically created a template. The habits of nonviolent protest, of mass meetings, of community organizing, that became the engine that drove the civil rights movement across the entire country.
And that leaves us with a really interesting question for our time. Today, a movement can spark online in an instant, spreading through millions of weak ties. But do they have the deep roots of strong tie friendships and the power to create lasting new habits? Or are they just built to burn really bright and then burn out? Something to think about.